Alright, so this story is going to be relatively unfamiliar or going against the narrative that most of us have ever been taught or even heard of. This is the story of William April Ellison. When the oppressed becomes the oppressor and the abused becomes the abuser. This is Perri UBUNTU. Welcome to the crown. In this world, an extraordinary or remarkable person comes along from time to time. That person reigns, rules, or leads in a fashion like none other. Mortals take on God complexes, sometimes against their own will. Some wear crowns of gold, crowns of jewels, thorns, and even flesh. Nonetheless, it's a crown. So the year is 1790. William Ellison Jr., also known by April, was born on a plantation near Winnsboro, South Carolina. April Ellison's slave master or owner, whose name is William Ellison Sr., named him April, notating the month in which he was born, a common practice in those days. While we know for certain April's mother was black, it is widely thought that his father was most likely white. April appeared light-skinned, so he and those around him made a clear distinction between him and the enslaved population. Beginning at a young age, April's slave master, who was a planter, apprenticed April to a cotton gin maker named William McCrate. Ellison Jr. would become very skilled in the trade, allowing him to make a substantial amount of money in his adult years, especially for an African American during that time. See, the invention of the cotton gin in 1793 wasn't just an innovation, it altered the actual identity of the United States. Colonizers, hundreds of thousands, moved to the more southern states where it was much more feasible to grow cotton in abundance. Of course, that also means many enslaved Africans were forced further south to work the fields, domesticating the slave market and introducing the new norm. Let's be clear, there's no such thing as slaves, but only enslaved people. Nonetheless, after 6 years, April finished his apprenticeship and became a short-term employee of the same shop, where he also learned blacksmithing. However, the majority of April's earnings went to his master due to him being hired out and not yet independent. Apparently, South Carolina, along with Louisiana, allowed skilled enslaved people to earn a little money on Sundays. What's life without love, right? At the age of 21, April marries his sweetheart, Matilda. I guess it's important to note that because enslaved Africans and African Americans were not considered humans, their marriage was not considered legit. Soon thereafter, April and Matilda welcomed their first child, a baby girl, Eliza. Eventually, they'd add 3 sons and 2 more daughters. Finally, the subject matter of what most of you probably clicked on this video to learn about. April is freed by his master on June 8, 1816, after purchasing his own freedom with money saved from his meager earnings. However, April wouldn't be able to buy the freedom of his wife or children for years to come. Imagine that feeling, leaving your loved ones to who knows what. Because children born into slavery are considered the property of the mother's slave master, April focused his initial efforts and money on releasing his wife. This would prevent any future children from being born into slavery. In addition, several laws at the time made it nearly impossible for freemen to purchase family members out of slavery. Not only did the purchaser have to have 5 other freemen vouch for him, they must also prove the potential freemen could support themselves once they are freed. How could a child support themselves? Fast forward 1 year to 1817. April moves to Sumter, South Carolina, and establishes himself as a cotton gin maker. Sumter was quickly being developed for cotton plantations. Jump 1 year to 1819, and April has officially purchased his first couple of enslaved men to work within his shop and the number practically doubled each decade thereafter. He owned 4 enslaved men by 1830, 8 by 1840, and expanded his business to include a blacksmith shop with artisan enslaved people by 1850. That year, April owned 386 acres of land and established his very own cotton plantation. By this point, April owned 32 enslaved people. A mere 2 years later, April had acquired over 1,000 acres and turned his operation into a family-run business. Each of April's sons received a portion of the land and enslaved women as domestic servants for each of their families. It should be noted that April only had dark-skinned enslaved people to ensure the line was always clear of his position and status, as well as theirs. While slavery in itself is known for its brutality, April had a reputation of his own for his mistreatment of enslaved people. In fact, the district in which April's plantation was located, his enslaved population was the most underfed and overworked. They were also the most ill-clothed in the district. Side note, wealth. In the good old days, purchasing and installing a family bench within the Episcopal Church of the Holy Cross located in Statesburg was the maximum flex of wealth. So what do you think April did? Yep, April was the first free African American to purchase a bench on the first floor of the church in 1824. April even established his own family cemetery. Today, April Ellison is thought to have been the wealthiest black slave master during the antebellum South and amongst the richest slave masters in general, regardless of race. Soon, the American Civil War will begin. Now, people are generally torn on the reasoning and motives of the cause of the war. Some people believe it was about the overreach of power by the North and the states' rights or freedom of the southern states to conduct business as usual. Others believe the South fought to keep slavery. Regardless of the true cause, April felt the South was fighting for a righteous cause and supported the Confederate Army's efforts, not just verbally. April offered the Confederate Army 53 enslaved individuals as a labor force and transformed his plantation he once crafted for cotton into growing mixed crops to supply the troops. I have my own opinions of April, but that's not what I'm here for. I'll just lay out what I know as truth and allow you to decide. I digress. In 2005, a prominent African American doctor riddled with lung cancer quickly spread into his brain, shocked the community of Youngstown. 71-year-old Dr. Henry S. Ellison III begrudgingly admitted that he was the great-grandson of William April Ellison, Jr. Dr. Ellison was the first African American doctor in Youngstown and was admired and deeply loved by the black community. In fact, Dr. Ellison is perceived by the community to be the polar opposite of his great-grandfather. Was known to volunteer endless hours and open doors and opportunities for African Americans. Dr. Ellison went his entire life trying to avoid people knowing the roots of his evil family and generational wealth. Dr. Ellison first recognized something different from his family and other black families at an early age during the Great Depression. He asked different members of his family why the others didn't have the resources they were afforded, but everyone avoided the topic. Dr. Ellison didn't learn the truth all at once, but like a steady drip throughout the years. When Dr. Ellison married, he realized he couldn't really tell his wife and her family much about his history and lineage because his family kept it so tight-lipped. This is when he began to dig. It was around the Civil Rights era. Knowing that it would eventually come out, regardless of his participation in the divulgement of info, Dr. Ellison knew he had to clear his conscience before passing away. Dr. Ellison's wife was also battling cancer. At the time of the interview, Dr. Ellison mentioned how he was experiencing the worst pain of his life at the time, but he couldn't cancel the meeting. the truth must come out. So what I think most people, including myself, would love to know with 100% certainty is why. Why did April Ellison choose to be an oppressive figure over his own race of people? Arguably, Ellison even became a worse version of his master. While this doesn't make being an oppressive human trafficker or enslaver any better, it should be noted that Ellison wasn't the only one of his kind. In fact, in the state of South Carolina alone, there were at least 180 other African American slave masters in the year 1850, with the overwhelming majority being former slaves themselves. Was Ellison a sociopath? A self-hating racist? I think the answer is either super complex or super simple. By that I mean from a righteous point of view, not to be conflated with religious. I think the simple answer would be to utilize your power and wealth to free as many of your own people as possible. The route of other countless former enslaved people who risked life and limb to remove as many people as physically possible. The difficult answer would be, we'll never understand how someone in his or their position would react in the 17 and 1800s. It's easy to become self-righteous and say what you would do from the comforts of 2021. The uncomfortable solution could possibly be that April understood owning other people to work your business could be one of the most profitable decisions you can make at that time, especially as a black man in the South. Whether he thought it was right or wrong, clearly slavery was wrong. I think a lot more people would choose to be amongst the elite in a similar situation as Ellison. If you think my perspective is extreme, just take a look at social media today. Look at the lengths that people are taking to gain clout. Just a little something to ponder. Welcome to the crown.